you for being here at 4 o'clock when you all probably either want to go home or want to have a drink. So thank you very much for bearing with me. And I did also just say, if at any point throughout this presentation you want to ask me a question, interrupt me, let's have a chat. Let's make it a bit engaging and interactive for the last session. But I'd like us to all start off just imagining that you grew up in these flats, looking at these offices all of your life. Nobody in your family or nobody that you know has ever had a job. But you dream one day about working in there, and so you work super hard. You get the best grades at your underperforming state school, and you do every single opportunity that is available to you to be able to start your career, and you do it. But then you get there, and you feel like that you've been dropped off a cliff into the most important game of your life, and you don't know what the rules are. Now, it sounds a bit dramatic, but that is exactly what I was being told when I hosted an alumni event with really bright, intelligent people who had started their careers. They were up to 10 years into their career, and they were all describing a similar thing that they experienced when they started their very first job. Ultimately, they had gone into work without the preparation of understanding how to navigate the complexities of the workplace and without the relationships with people who could really support them to thrive. And this genuinely devastated me because I had been working at the intersection of early careers and social impact for about 10 years at that point. And I was working with TA teams, working with HR leaders, and I was thinking, we're doing a great job. Like, we're meeting those diversity targets. We're making sure that young people are starting their careers. But the fact that it wasn't actually having the outcome for all of those young people that we anticipated, and some people were not getting their promotions, they were not actually being retained, and they were sometimes saying, actually, we're just going to leave this job, that really was not what I thought was actually happening. And it was devastating for me. So the question is it because we're hiring the wrong people? Or is it because something else is happening? And I can tell you, if you want to leave now because you want to get your drink, it's not the hiring process, it's everything that is happening afterwards. And so let's start off with the data about this. So, according to the Institute of Student Employers, young people are not meeting work readiness expectations, and this has been a trend increasing year on year, and I'm sure a lot of you in this room will have experienced that so far. A lot of the issues are around self-awareness, resilience, verbal communication, and so generally we're coalescing around this interpersonal skills and a general kind of work preparedness. And it's also young people who are feeling this as well. They're feeling very anxious and unprepared, and only 47% of young people actually feel that education has prepared them for work. And it's no surprise when you think about the fact that we have had this generation being completely impacted by COVID. They have had less opportunity for part-time work to develop skills. And generally, they are coming into the working world facing one of the biggest mental health crises of any generation that's come before them. But it's not just young people themselves that are changing. It's not about blaming it all on them. It's also the work environment. The conditions that young people are coming into are very different and make things a lot more challenging. So we work hybrid or remote, which makes learning by osmosis very difficult. We have a general volatility in terms of we have redundancies, there's a cost of living crisis, and generally people are expected to do more with less in the workplace, so which makes training and developing young people on the job a lot harder. And AI is impacting everything from the way we expect young people to work, but also how we're hiring, and often we may be hiring young people who are inflating some of their skills with the use of AI technology. But what we don't talk about enough is the role that stereotyping Gen Z has and these perceptions that we have about Gen Z and how that's impacting the way that we support them. So who here has kind of heard a version of these kind of statements in their organisation at some point in time? Yeah, most hands are going to go up. And the thing that I think about this is, first and foremost, not only is this bias and discriminatory, I mean, if I replaced the word Gen Z on that slide with any other word, so if I said black people, disabled people, I'm going to end up in tribunal. But for some reason, we think we can say that about young people, and that's completely fine. But separate to that, we don't recognise the impact that has on the lens in which we view young people. So when a manager has this perception in their minds and they come across a young person in their organisation, they will automatically assume, well, it's because they're lazy and because they're entitled, not because actually they're just struggling with workplace readiness skills. And when we don't start with that place, it means that we don't actually address the real problem. And generational differences isn't the only thing that is prevalent at the moment when we're thinking about early careers. We also have various different factors of difference amongst early careers talent between them and their managers. So generation is one thing, but there's also gender, socioeconomic background, ethnicity, beliefs, disability, neurodiversity. All these various different things that actually create a gap between that young person and their manager, which is often filled with assumptions and stereotypes. Now, what this can actually do, it can actually set off a bit of a cycle. And within this cycle, if you've got assumptions and stereotypes about a young person and you don't build that relationship, you will use those stereotypes and assumptions to fill the gaps in your knowledge. And you will perceive every single behaviour that you see from that young person through that lens, which then can lead to a lot of frustration and a lot of friction, which can start to erode the relationship between the manager and that young person. Now, all of the research shows that when relationships are poor between a manager and a young person, it means that manager is less likely to offer support, offer feedback, and generally psychological safety will be eroded between the two, which then has a negative impact on that young person. And then performance will dip, and it will actually lead to either somebody disengaging or leaving the organisation. So clearly, managers are an essential part of this talent development equation. But I want to ask everyone a quick question. How many people here are managers? If you could keep your hands up for a minute. How many of you had received formal training? Okay, a few hands go down. How many of you have received training to support young people in the organisation? Less hands. And then to support young people who are also from an underrepresented background or a background different to your own. Well, I can assume that nobody's hand's going to be up anymore. And yet, if we sent our children to school and they said, do you know what, I don't like it here and I'm not performing very well, and we said, okay, are the teachers here trained? And the answer was no. We would say, well, that's the school's problem, not the young person's problem here. But yet we're doing that every day in early careers and blaming that young person and not on the structures and the systems that we've put around them, especially those when it comes to the managers. Now, some of you might say, well, actually, we do train our managers and we still have problems with these things. And I will say, well, when it comes to a relationship, you can't put two people in separate rooms and expect the relationship between them to be formed and to be effective. I mean, a relationship counsellor would never, it doesn't make any sense. But why am I going on about this relationship thing so much? Well, it's because it's not just the personal opinion, it's what the research says. But first of all, I would like you to think about the best manager or best teacher you've ever had. Just take a second to have a think about them. They brought out the best in you, and I'm sure you don't think that because you remember the KPIs that they set for you or because they delivered really great content in their sessions. You remember that because they saw you, you trusted them, they knew how you worked, and overall they made you feel valued and understood. This has also been found in various studies. So the quality assurance agency for higher education, looking specifically at apprentices, found that the quality of the relationship with a manager is a direct factor in the success of that apprentice. It's not a nice to have, it's a direct factor in their success. And more broadly, this has been shown across a meta-analysis of 146 studies. And the really interesting thing about this is understanding the relationship between a manager and their employee. That is the biggest predictor as to whether or not the performance of that employee is going to be good versus not good at all. And the key thing here that was really mediating that was the trust between the two. Another really interesting thing related to this is it's not enough just for a manager to think that, oh yeah, the relationship's great. Another really good predictor as to whether or not somebody is going to leave an organisation is the difference in perception between the manager and that early talent about the relationship. So if you measure this and actually see that there is an issue with how well rated the relationship is, you are going to be able to see a correlation with that, with how likely that person is to leave the organisation. And of course, we all know that people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And studies have found 43% of people have left their job at some point in time due to the relationship with their manager. And equally, 38% of people have stayed longer as a result of the relationship with their manager. So it's undeniable when we look at all of these different factors how important the relationship truly is. Now, some of you might say, actually, well, we have exit interview data and we don't see people complaining about the relationship with their manager. And I will say, when you've left your job, how often do you say, it's because I didn't like my manager, and you make up another reason for it? And then think about these being younger people as well. Like, you're not getting the truth. So, of course, there's all of these reasons that I've put forward to you as to why the relationship is important. And there are so many things that it will actually support if you support that relationship itself. And I'm not going to kind of talk through what you probably already can infer from that. But ultimately, if you've got better performance and retention, you've got overall cost savings, you've got more productivity, you've got less stress as HR teams having to firefight the issues that come up when things aren't going right. But then, again, I know that people will say, well, actually, Aisha, once I hire somebody, once we hire someone as an organisation, I have no control over what happens in that day-to-day relationship. Like, I can't reach into that. And I will say, actually, no, you can reach into that. And I first started thinking about this after working with, I personally worked with early careers talent for the entirety of my career, and always they have also been from an underrepresented background. So I started by reverse engineering. What is it that we actually do that works? And then looked at the research, and then decided to develop a program around this and work with some companies to see if it actually works. And so I have a bit of a case study for you now. I know we all love a case study. So what we did, we worked with organisations who were hiring apprentices in professional services. And we worked with not only apprentices who had been at the very beginning of their apprenticeship, but also those who were 14 months into their apprenticeship as well. And we did all of the things that you would expect. So we did the early talent development, we did the line manager development, but the thing where the magic really was in the middle. And it was a relationship bridging experience, or a connection building experience that we were really testing to see whether it would make the difference. And so when it came to the early talent development, we did all the things that you would expect, especially those things you can see on your top row. But what was really a key point about this was, let's ensure that we can really prime these young people to be ready to understand their manager's world, their manager's pressures, their stresses, and ultimately what the role that they were going to have to play as an employee within their teams. And we learned some really interesting things as a result of this. And the first one is that some young people did not understand the dynamic of a manager and a manager. They'd come straight out of school and they were there thinking, well, the dynamic I'm used to is having a teacher. I'm on an apprenticeship, I'm still learning. My manager is my teacher and should be there to support me. And they hadn't thought about the pressures and the stresses that their managers are going through, and even just the fact that their managers have their own manager that they've got to deal with. When I don't turn up to work, that leaves my manager with more work to do. Some young people had not even considered that. The second thing is that they hadn't understood the importance of building relationships outside of their peer group. So they were very comfortable building those peer-to-peer relationships, but when it came to building those relationships with other people, they didn't see the value, but also there was a lot of anxiety around some of that. So they thought, well, actually, I'd rather eat my lunch alone in peace, as opposed to trying to form those relationships with these more senior people. And also some of those opportunities to form those relationships, for example, after-work drinks, they just didn't see that the alignment for what they wanted to do and spend their time after work with those types of activities. But the most interesting thing, and I think the thing to take away from this, is when relationships are strained between a manager and young talent, it makes it very hard for them to take on any kind of developmental feedback or advice. They would often feel that the advice coming from the manager or the feedback coming from the manager was purely in that manager's best interest or the company's best interest and not in their own. And so they would often reject it and ignore it. So when it came to the line manager development, again, a big part of that is really thinking about how we help managers understand young people and how we help them understand young people who are also different to them. And some really interesting takeaways from that work was that a lot of managers were assuming that when young people weren't doing things that they expected, it was intentional. They know what they should be doing, but they're just choosing not to do it. They don't care. Not that actually a lot of these young people had no idea what was genuinely expected of them and how they should be showing up. There was also a lack of awareness as to why young people were different and why there were certain drivers that meant that young people now were so different to how they were 5, 10 years ago. And so understanding that really helped managers to lose some of the frustration and have a little bit more understanding and patience, which was really key. But the most interesting thing for me again here is that getting managers in a room and asking, what do you actually expect? There wasn't agreement. Different managers had different expectations, especially around a lot of the unwritten rules of the workplace. And to give you an example of that, I would say, okay, so we start work at 9 o'clock. What time is late? Some managers would say 8:45, you've got to get time, have your coffee and be at your desk. Some people would say 9:05, that's fine, you can just, I get in at 9:05, what does it matter? Just that one example alone demonstrates that we cannot expect young people to know what to do in the workplace if we have such varying expectations amongst ourselves. And the need to be incredibly explicit is absolutely central. But then, as I said, the magic, the relationship bridging, the connection building. Once we'd primed those two groups, we then brought them together, the thing that we never actually do, to get to know one another as human beings. It sounds basic, but a lot of us, we don't have the time, we're too busy, and quite frankly, a lot of people don't know how. So we made it easy for people. A really useful exercise that we did was something we call a personal user guide. And it's a guide to working with me. And it meant that both young people and their managers were able to talk about the things that stress them out, the things that bring them joy, how they work best, any personal commitments that they have outside of work. And that just created the space for people to have conversations, to know how to work with each other that were never usually being had. The other thing that we did is we not only taught them how to give each other and receive feedback, but we also got them to practice it. Something that we very rarely do. We send people on a training, they go away, and they go, oh, we hope for the best, I hope that all works out. But it's not until people actually practice it in a controlled environment, especially with the person that they're going to have to give that feedback to, that they are more likely to actually give it. So what did we learn from that joint session? Where did the magic all really happen? Well, ultimately, the key thing is both managers and the early talent really appreciated understanding each other's perspectives. It wasn't a one-way flow. And pairs that had worked together for over a year hadn't realised that they weren't actually, they were doing things that were actively making it difficult for the other person. And feedback that had been festering finally actually was shared. So I am proud of this, not because of the, 100% of early talent build their skills and 100% of managers. It's not that I'm proud of. What I'm proud of is the fact that the relationships actually improved, but the behaviour change, positive behaviour change, actually occurred within 2 weeks of this. And so that's what we're ultimately looking for, right? Behaviour change. So the question really here is the relationship gap a source of some of your early careers challenges? And we already know it's costing you, so I'm not going to labour that point if it is. But there's 3 things for you to really think about. And it's not a yes or no, it's a how likely is it that this is actually happening. And the first thing is, do we have risk factors in our organisation? Do we have a big gap already? Is the cohort of young people coming in different in terms of background to the cohort of managers that I already have? Am I seeing any signs within the organisation that suggest that we have issues with retention or the performance? Are we already seeing that's potentially happening? And finally, do we have any safeguards in place to protect against this relationship challenge? And that will give us a likelihood of whether it's really the true cause or there's something else. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through and give you this slide to have a look at. Now, if you want to take a picture, this is the slide I would suggest you take a picture of. And these are some things that you can think about as an organisation. Like, have a look at these risks and see how many risks you have in place. Have a look at these signs and see, am I seeing any of these things? But most importantly, let's have a look at the safeguards that you have in place. Are you training your managers? And are you training them how to support young people and young people who are different? Are you making it really clear and supporting managers to make their expectations really explicit, including the unwritten ones? And are you doing work around working styles and needs? Are you training young people to manage up, not just personal brand and confidence? And are you actually ensuring that you help them with 2-way feedback? Now, a key thing here, in terms of bringing people together and also seeing whether you've got a risk factor as well, is actually measuring that manager and young person relationship. Ask your managers, ask your young people, what is the relationship like between you and your manager? And if you're starting to see a gap in that rating, that suggests that you're likely having a relationship problem at play. So my call to action is please, please, please help your managers build relationships with your early talent. It's one of the highest leverage things that you can do. And a lot of the things that I've suggested you can do for free, and it will have significant impact. And we need to remember that human relationships are the foundation for thriving careers, and that this generation of young people will be the leaders that we will be relying on tomorrow. And so investing in this is going to give us long-term returns. And if you would like to connect with me to talk more about this, please stick around, email me, and hopefully, as I said, the one thing that you take away from this is we can do something really impactful that will make a huge difference to our early careers. Thank you.